John Schneider just walked out of the 2026 NFL Draft with a strategy that is starting to look a lot more calculated and a lot more dangerous than many fans first realized. And the deeper you dig into what the Seahawks actually did over those days, the clearer it becomes that this front office may have quietly reshaped the foundation of this roster in a very real way. Because at first glance, some fans were unsure. There wasn't that flashy, headline-grabbing move at edge rusher, and for a team that still has questions in that department, it stood out. But when you step back and actually evaluate the full picture, what Schneider accomplished was something far more complete. He didn't chase noise, he addressed needs, and he did it almost across the board. Before we continue, be sure to click the like button and write in the comments, "Go Hawks." Start with the obvious. Seattle needed a running back, and they got Jadarian Price. Not just a body for the rotation, but someone who can realistically step into a 1A or 1B role in a thunder and lightning approach. That's not a depth move. That's a foundational piece for how this offense wants to operate moving forward. They needed a quarterback addition, and Julian Neal comes in as a fascinating option. Not necessarily someone you immediately hand the keys to, but a player with traits that fit specific matchups, someone who can be deployed strategically. That kind of flexibility matters more than ever in today's NFL, especially in a division loaded with offensive firepower. Then you look at the secondary and the offensive line, two areas where depth can make or break your season. Seattle added Bud Clark at safety and Bo Stevens at offensive tackle, and those are not just fill-the-roster picks. These are players who are already being talked about as potential contributors, even starters. And Bud Clark in particular is turning heads. There's a growing belief that he's not just going to rotate in, he could legitimately compete for a starting role, even pushing someone like Ty Okada for snaps. That's not a small statement. That's internal competition being injected into a defense that thrives on versatility. What makes this even more interesting is how Schneider balanced the draft. The first phase was about plugging holes, making sure this roster didn't have glaring weaknesses heading into the season. But the second phase? That's where things get really intriguing. That's where you see names like Emmanuel Henderson Jr., Andre Fuller, Michael Dansby, and Devin Eastern. These are not safe picks. These are bets. High-upside, high-variance players who haven't fully put it all together yet. But if even one of them hits, you're suddenly talking about a completely different level of draft success. And that's the key. This draft doesn't need all of them to work. It just needs one or two to break through. If that happens, combined with the players already expected to contribute, Seattle could walk away from this class with multiple starters and a legitimate difference maker. Now, layer that on top of what's already happening with this roster. There's confidence building around players like Jaxon Smith-Njigba, who continues to be viewed internally as a centerpiece of the offense, and there's a belief that this coaching staff, described as having elite football intelligence, can maximize these new pieces in ways that don't always show up immediately on draft night reactions. And then there's the bigger picture. The Seahawks didn't just sit back during the off-season. They explored major moves. There was a serious push for Max Crosby, with reports indicating Seattle even put together a massive offer that ultimately wasn't enough to close the deal. That matters, because it shows intent. This isn't a front office sitting on its hands. They're aggressive when the opportunity is right, but they're also disciplined enough not to force a move that doesn't fall their way. Even in the division, the landscape is shifting. The Rams have improved, no question. But they come with their own risks: reliance on Matthew Stafford, durability concerns with key weapons, and a secondary that, while improved, is also getting older. And from Seattle's perspective, there's no fear there. The expectation internally is that these matchups remain tight, physical, and often decided by a single score. That hasn't changed. What may have changed is Seattle's depth and flexibility heading into those battles. When you put it all together, this draft starts to feel less like a collection of picks and more like a layered strategy. Immediate contributors, developmental upside, positional balance, and just enough risk to create the possibility of something special. So now it comes down to how it translates on the field. Because if even 2 or 3 of these rookies step into meaningful roles early, and one of those upside swings connects, you're looking at a roster that's deeper, more dynamic, and better equipped to compete not just in the NFC West, but beyond. And that's where I want to bring this to you, because this is the real conversation right now among Seahawks fans. After breaking down everything John Schneider did in this draft, do you believe this class will actually produce multiple starters and change the trajectory of this team this season? Or are there still too many unanswered questions for you to buy in completely? Because if there's one thing that's becoming very clear as we connect all these dots, it's that Seattle didn't just draft. For 2026, they drafted with layers, with contingencies, and with internal competition in mind at nearly every position group. And that's exactly where this conversation gets even more interesting for the direction of this franchise. Take the offensive side of the ball again, because Jadarian Price wearing number 8 is not just a small detail, it's a signal. This is a player the organization expects fans to recognize quickly, someone who could carve out a visible role early in the season. And if he does step into that 1A, 1B rotation like many expect, that changes how defenses have to approach Seattle entirely. It creates balance, it takes pressure off the passing game, and it opens up opportunities for explosive plays downfield. Now, shift back to the defense, because this is where the Seahawks might have quietly done their most important work. The potential of Bud Clark becoming not just a contributor, but a starter adds a completely different dimension to the secondary. We're talking about a unit that could become fluid, interchangeable, what was described as almost an amoeba-style defense, where multiple safeties rotate, disguise coverages, and create confusion for opposing quarterbacks. That's not just scheme, that's identity. And if it clicks, it gives Seattle a tactical edge every single week. Then you add Bo Stevens into the mix on the offensive line, battling with Anthony Bradford for a starting role. That's another example of how this draft class isn't being handed anything. They're being thrown into real competition. And that matters, because the best teams don't just rely on starters. They build environments where starting jobs are earned and re-earned. Even Julian Neal, who might not be an every-down player right away, could become critical in specific matchups. Think about bigger receivers, physical threats. Those are the situations where his skill set becomes valuable immediately. That's how modern defenses operate now. Not just with starters, but with situational weapons. And then there's the wild card conversation that's starting to build more momentum behind the scenes. Player development. Because while this draft brought in new names, there's also growing attention around players already connected to the Seahawks pipeline, especially someone like Jalen Milroe. There's real belief that his work ethic, combined with the environment in Seattle, could eventually lead to him starting games in the NFL. That's not being framed as a guarantee, but it's also not being dismissed. The organization sees value in letting players grow at their own pace, and Milroe is a perfect example of that philosophy in action. Now bring all of this together, and you start to see what the Seahawks are building. It's not just about plugging gaps. It's about creating waves of talent. Players who can contribute now, players who can develop into something more, and a system that allows both to coexist without forcing timelines. And this is why the earlier frustration about not landing a big-name edge rusher like Max Crosby starts to feel a little different in hindsight. Yes, Seattle pushed hard. Yes, they made a serious offer. But instead of overextending, they pivoted. And in doing so, they may have built something deeper instead of something flashier. Because championships aren't just won with stars, they're sustained with depth, adaptability, and internal competition. And right now, that's exactly what this roster is starting to reflect. At the same time, the NFC West is not slowing down. The Rams are still going to be a problem. Those matchups are still expected to be tight, likely coming down to one-possession games just like we've seen before, which means the difference between winning the division or falling short could come down to something as simple and as critical as which team gets more from its rookie class. And that brings us full circle to this draft. Because if Seattle gets 2 starters, that's solid. If they get 3, that's a win. But if they get 4 contributors and 1 breakout player from those high-upside picks, then we're talking about a class that doesn't just support the roster, it elevates it. That's the ceiling. That's the possibility that's sitting in front of this team right now. So as we head toward the season, every snap from these rookies is going to matter. Every camp battle, every preseason rep, every early rotation, it's all part of figuring out whether John Schneider just had a good draft or one that quietly reshapes the Seahawks' future. Now, I want you to stay locked in, because we're going to keep tracking every development, every breakout, every surprise from this class right here. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, drop a like if you're riding with the Seahawks this season, and click on the video that's on your screen right now, because the latest Seahawks news and analysis, you're only going to find it here.